নমস্কার। ১৯ শতকের নারীদের লেখা আত্মজীবনী আপনারা এই সিরিজে শুনছেন। কিন্তু আজকের পর্বটি একটু অন্যরকম। তার কারণ আজকে এটা ইংরেজিতে হবে। তার মূল কারণ হচ্ছে যে এই আত্মজীবনীটি ইংরেজিতে লেখা। সুনীতি দেবী, কোচবিহারের মহারানী, তার আত্মজীবনী The Autobiography of an Indian Princess এই বলে লিখেছেন। Sunitee Devee was born in 1864 to illustrious parents. Her mother, Jaganmohini Sen, and father was Keshab Chandra Sen, who was a known intellectual and a Brahmo reformist. Sunitee was second of their 10 children. She was married off at the age of 14. This is a very candid kind of an autobiography she had written because she did not mince her words. She wrote exactly as she thought and felt about different things. I was born in 1864 at the old house known as Sen's house, which my great-grandfather built at Kolutala, a part of Calcutta where many of our family lived. My birth was always remembered in connection with a storm which occurred when I was 6 days old, a most important time to a Hindu baby. For then the Creator is supposed to visit the home and write upon its forehead the little one's fate. Perhaps people will think the stormy weather in the beginning signified a stormy future for me. No girl could have been more fortunate in her parents than I. My father, the great Keshab Chandra Sen, is considered one of the most remarkable men India has ever produced. And my dear mother belonged to the best type of Hindu woman, gentle, loving, and self-denying. Her whole life was beautiful in its goodness and its simplicity. The story of a great religious movement is not one which can be told at length in a book of memories. The religion for which my father suffered and which will be forever connected with his name is the Brahmo or religion of the new dispensation, a religion of tolerance and charity. When Keshab Chandra Sen, born into a Hindu Vaishnava family, announced his conversion to Brahmo, the entire Sen family was aghast. The ladies in the parda threatened Sunitee's mother, Keshab Chandra's wife, with dire consequences because she would be causing sins. But the little girl did not pay any heed to this. She only knew that she had to be with the person she loved and believed in. So, with her head fully covered, she crossed the courtyard. It was like crossing the Rubicon. They passed down the corridor and found themselves in the first courtyard opposite the great entrance, where the Darwans, the gatekeepers, were standing on guard. Twice my father ordered the Darwans to open the door, but they did not move. It was very still in the courtyard. My mother was frightened. This was a strange adventure, and hitherto she had hardly seen a man except her husband. A trembling, slim girl, she stood near my father with her headdress pulled quite low. Across the door there was a huge iron bar, which was too heavy for one man to lift. My father, seeing that the Darwans would not open the door, went to lift the bar and did so quite easily. Then a voice was heard speaking from the upper floor. It was my father's elder brother. He had watched all that had happened, and seeing that my parents were determined, he decided to let them go. "Let them pass and open the gate,"
he called out to the Darwans. The wondering Darwans threw open the door, and my parents passed from the shadows into sunlight. My father took my mother to the beautiful house of Maharshi Debendranath Tagore. The household were all waiting to welcome them, though they had great doubts whether my father would be able to bring my mother away from such a strict Hindu family. The Maharshi introduced my mother to his daughters as if she had been his own child. Although a rich man's daughter-in-law and a rich youth's wife, my mother was wearing a simple sari with hardly any jewels. She always spoke of the great kindness and affection she received from this family, and she deeply revered the old Maharshi. We have always felt that there is a great bond between our two families. My parents remained away for some time, during which my father's formal conversion took place. After some months, my grandmother and uncle begged him to return and gave him a small house near the big house. There my parents lived until my father fell seriously ill, and his eldest brother declared that in spite of all difficulties, he must come back to the old home.
Now that they have lost their caste, they were facing a lot of problems, like cooks were not ready to work in their house because they were supposed to be Christians. But these were minor problems. Sunity talked of happy childhood. She talked of the ashram where people came and lived. She talked of her father, Keshab Chandra Sen, a very calm and quiet person like Buddha. She also talks of his split from Debendranath Tagore on issues related to caste, and she also says that Tagore was jealous of him because of his popularity. Sunity spent a very happy childhood in that household, but even then, she felt like an outsider. In those days, the new brides could not see their husbands during the day. So, the little girl Sunity acted as a go between. She carried letters to and fro for these new married couples. She writes about the upper caste aristocratic 19th century household in a very detailed manner. It is difficult to convey to English readers a real idea of the fascination of its cool, silent interior with the 6 courtyards and the deep wells which supplied drinking and bathing water. In the Zanana part of the establishment, where the strict Parda ladies lived, the rooms ran round one of these courtyards, and the ladies were never allowed to walk outside it. When they went into town, the palkis came right inside to fetch them. It was a traditional patriarchal household. But Keshab Chandra was an enlightened man. He believed in education. He built a school and later on built a college too, which was named after Queen Victoria. Suniti went to Bethune School and her brother went to school also. At home, they were taught by their mother. They were taught English and Bengali. Suniti says her mother was a very happy woman who never regretted her loss of caste, and they all lived a very simple life with very ordinary indigenous clothes, saris that she wore, and there was never anything foreign in their house. Suniti was never considered a pretty girl, she says. and she vowed not to marry. But that was not to be. She writes, "My happy home life continued undisturbed until I was 13. Indian girls of that age and more advanced than their Western sisters, but I was still very much a child, thanks to my parents. My father's name is forever associated with the Civil Marriage Act, as it was entirely owing to his exertions that the government passed this wise measure, fixing the marriageable age of men and girls at 18 and 14 respectively. The fairy prince in my romance was the young Nripendra Narayan Bhup Bahadur, Maharaja of Coochbehar, who had been a ward of the government since his infancy and carefully educated to be a model ruler. To ensure final success for the government scheme, it was necessary that the young ruler should marry an equally advanced girl, who would second him in his and incidentally the government's efforts for Coochbehar. The difficult problem then arose as to whether an educated wife would agree to the polygamy hitherto customary with Maharajas, and to adopt the many old fashioned ideas and ways of a Hindu court. The government was keenly alive to the fact that marriage might make or mar their experiment, and they were determined to do all they could to prevent failure. But as it is a principle of the British not to interfere with the marriage question in India, it was necessary for them to be very discreet in their plans. Mr. Keshab Chandra Sen, the magistrate of Coochbehar, was deputed to make confidential investigations and find, if possible, the enlightened girl whom the government could approve as the Maharani of Coochbehar. The party from Coochbehar, in search of a bride, at last arrived at Calcutta. And Mr. Chakrabarti went direct to Prasanna Babu, one of my father's missionaries, for advice and help. After several interviews and discussions, Jadhav spoke of me. But Mr. Chakrabarti said, "It is too much to expect that the minister's daughter will be our Maharani." Still, they thought they would try. When the marriage was first suggested, my father was very surprised. He never gave a thought to worldly or family affairs. His mind was too full of his religious work, and he refused the offer. But the government and the representatives of the state would not be discouraged. They continued writing to my father, interviewing him, and sending messages urging that the marriage of the young prince and myself was most desirable. My father repeatedly refused. In one of his letters, he said that I was neither very pretty nor highly educated, and therefore I was not a suitable bride for the young Maharaja. The Brahmo Act that my father wished the government to pass was not agreed to by other Brahmos, such as Maharshi Debendranath Tagore and others. Although the Tagores called themselves Brahmos, they wanted their marriage ceremony to be known as Hindu marriage, non-idolatrous. As they opposed it, the act was not passed. But instead of it, Act 3 of 1872, in which one of the many things mentioned was that the bride was not to be under 14 or the bridegroom under 18 years of age. But the Brahmo marriage bill, as worded by my father and from which the following extract is taken, will remove all misunderstandings. I am a native of British India. I do not profess the Christian religion, and I object to be married in accordance with the rites of the Hindu, Mohammedan, Buddhist, Parsi, or Jewish religion. It sounds too dreadful to have to say no to all religions. One and all, I believe, resent it, but there is no other law for a Brahmo marriage. But after a lot of persuasion and many letters, Keshab Chandra Sen finally had to given. So there was the marriage. But from Coochbehar side, they said it would be just a solemn betrothal and not a marriage as it is supposed to be. So there was the marriage, but it wasn't as smooth as one thought it would be, because the Coochbehar family was a Hindu family and Sunitee's parents were Brahmo. So obviously there was a lot of difference of opinion regarding the customs, and there was a time came when the marriage was almost called off. Suddenly the fireworks stopped and everywhere it was silent, and one thought the marriage would not take place. But then Maharaja thought for a while and he was very silent, and he announced very quietly and very, very seriously that if he had to marry, it would be Suniti, otherwise he would not marry anyone. So then, all's well that ends well, right? So there was the marriage. But again, when they came to Calcutta, as it was known then, Keshab Chandra Sen received a lot of death threats. People thought he had gone against his own principles. They thought that he had given into wealth and fame, and his daughter was not yet 14. So there was a problem. But then the Raja left for Europe, as it was decided that he would leave as soon as he got married. But then again, after a year, he came back and they were really married this time, and they went for their honeymoon to Burdwan. And that was when Suniti's life as Maharani began. But first, let me tell you what she had written about her father regarding the marriage.
In 1884, 1st January, Keshab Chandra Sen passed away, and Suniti's mother gave up all her comforts. She wore coarse sari, she slept on hard bed. She writes, "My father's ashes rest in a mausoleum built in front of the new sanctuary. The ashes of my mother's body are near his, and close to them the ashes of my brother, his wife, and their baby boy, and next to them my third brother, Profullo. It is a peaceful spot. This tomb house in the garden, and these words of my father are inscribed on his mausoleum. Long since has this little bird, I, soared away from the sanctuary, I know not where, never to return again. Peace, peace, peace." In 1887, Sunitee travelled to England for the first time to attend Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee celebrations to mark her accession to the throne. She writes, "My husband made his plans for this eventful year long beforehand, but he cleverly kept all of us in the dark as to his intention that I should accompany him to England. It must be remembered that the conditions of life among Indian ladies were very different in 1887 from what they are today. The Maharani of Baroda, I believe, had once gone to Switzerland, but for the wife of a ruler to visit England with a husband caused quite a sensation. I think I'm right in saying that I was the first Maharani to do such a thing. And I may as well confess that I dreaded the experience. I knew absolutely nothing about the journey. I was going to be a stranger in a strange land, and I was sensitive enough to dread being stared at, for I well knew that this must be my fate in London. We sailed on the P&O boat, Ganges or Ballard, I forget which. I remember the captain of the boat took great pains to ensure our comfort on board. Our suite consisted of my two brothers, Nirmal and Prafulla, two ADCs, J. Raikat and S. Singh, our English private secretary, the late Mr. Bignell and his family, and our English nurse, besides our two selves and our three little children. We also had some Indian servants. I cannot describe my feelings when I realized that I actually left India, had passed another milestone on life's road, but I little dreamed that the far off country for which I was bound was destined to be a land of sorrow for me in the distant future. The glory of the sea enchanted me. When the boat was out on the ocean and no land could be seen, all nature seemed to speak of the infinite God, and I felt so small. In the dark evenings, when the water gleamed with phosphorescence, it looked as if there were thousands of stars under the sea responding to the stars above. It really was grand, a grandeur that no one could describe unless he had actually experienced it. Before we embarked, I had tasted meat for the first time in my life, and I disliked the flavor so much that for the first few days of the voyage, I ate nothing but a few vegetables. I often had fits of depression and sometimes left the dinner table to relieve my feelings with a good cry. I cannot describe my feelings when I found myself in the presence of the Queen. To us Indians, she was a more or less legendary figure endowed with wonderful attributes, an ideal ruler and an ideal woman, linked to our hearts across the black water by silken chains of love and loyalty. I looked at Her Majesty anxiously, and my first impression instantly dispelled by nervousness. A short, stout lady, dressed in mourning, who came forward and kissed me twice. I made a deep curtsy and walked a step backward, and then my husband came forward and bent low over the Queen's hand. I experienced a feeling, as did everyone with whom Her late Majesty came in contact, that she possessed great personal magnetism, and she certainly was the embodiment of dignity. Sunity gives vivid description of the Golden Jubilee celebrations. She also writes at times how she had to overcome her shyness and embarrassment to interact with the royalty. Life passed very swiftly and pleasantly for me during the Jubilee celebrations, and I was thoroughly spoiled, much to the delight of my husband. I have many recollections of that memorable year and can picture to myself many of my kind and charming hostesses. I remember once in the supper room at Buckingham Palace, my husband introduced the ex-Kaiser, then Prince William, to me, and the young prince bent down and kissed my hand. I blushed and my throat grew dry. My hand had never been kissed before by a man. After the prince left us, I tried to scold my husband in Bengali, but he laughed and said, "Suniti, it is a great honor that your hand should be kissed by the future German emperor. You ought to feel proud." Suniti talks of an interesting anecdote. Once she was sitting with the royal ladies and they asked her how she addressed her husband. So she said that Indian women didn't address their husbands by the name. So she said that I address my husband as Ogo. And they were very amused. So they started calling each other by addressing Ogo. So, which was a very funny thing for the Western ladies. Sunity often interacted with Queen and other members of the royal family. On one occasion, she was gifted the CI, the Crown of India. She had a good time. She went to theatres, operas, concerts, and one of the plays that she watched, she thought that it was very, the tragedy was similar to our own mythology, the story of Nal and Damayanti. So she basically enjoyed herself, but sometimes the Indian self came in the way, although she was getting used to the British way of life. She writes of a particular incident one day. One day, we went to a delightful afternoon party at Hatfield House. Hundreds of guests traveled down by a special train. When we arrived at the station, we found a number of carriages ready to convey us to the house. As I stood there with my husband, waiting for a carriage, the Maharaja of Kutch, who with his brother was already seated, asked us to get into his carriage. I hesitated a moment, and when I got in, as he is of higher rank than we are, he asked me to sit beside him. I wanted to be next to my husband, but the Maharaja of Kutch insisted, and so my husband and the brother sat opposite. In the next day's newspapers, we were described as the Maharaja and Maharani of Kutch, accompanied by the Maharaja of Coochbehar. I was much annoyed and asked my husband to contradict the report, but he only regarded it as a joke and said teasingly, "Why? Kutch is much better looking than I am." Suniti's third son, Victor, was born after she returned from England. Queen Victoria became his godmother, and Suniti says that it was probably the first time that an Indian Maharaja and Maharani were honored in this way. Suniti talks of the royal household with its parties, its dances, its hunting parties, polo tournaments. But she also says at times they hosted Indian dinners when the guests had to sit on the floor and eat with their fingers. Suniti also talks of a simple lifestyle that they led on Sundays. Her husband, she says, was basically a very simple man at heart, and he and his children all cooked together on Sundays, and Suniti felt that these were precious memories. Although he was progressive in his ideas, the Maharaja never approved of our ladies coming out too freely. He disliked women who smoked and drank with men. He used to say, "India has not yet arrived at the stage when her women can mix freely with men." I have often heard him declare that unchecked Indian youth is far worse than that of any other country. If he saw a girl with rouged cheeks and reddened lips, he would say, "You must never make yourselves look common by painting your faces. God gave women their good looks. Don't use art." Talking of her eldest son Raj's education, when he was sent to England, he was about to be sent to England for his education. Suniti says that she was not happy about it. She did not quite approve of it because she thought once the boys had this kind of English education, they would not like when they come back, and they would find it difficult to like their state and the people as they were backward. She writes about it. "I am of opinion that my people do not require a Western education. People seem to forget that thousands of years ago, India produced astronomers, poets, and sages, when most of the European races of today were cave dwellers. I feel hurt when I hear or read remarks about the bad taste we are supposed to display in our rush after English ideas. Boys who are educated in England do not always get the chance of seeing the right and bright side of English society and perhaps get married to girls who are not of their class. I do not blame either the Indian students or the government for the troubles that have arisen, but as a mother, I beg of the English people to go thoroughly into the whole matter before they judge their students. Sunity says that the children, after coming back from England, they know Greek and French, but they have no knowledge of Sanskrit or Urdu, or they are not even fluent in the local language of Coochbehar. Suniti talks of her other children as well, and she talked of other visits to England. One of the visits was when the Maharaja, her husband, was very ill, and for his treatment they had to go to England. But unfortunately he passed away after some time. Then Suniti says that she was overwhelmed with grief, and she writes, "Widowhood in India is different from what it is in the West. It is a far harder life. Caste, religion, and custom make it very hard and sad for the widow, whether she be old or young. If a widow laughs loudly or dresses in a way that could possibly be called gay, cruel remarks are made on all sides. And if a Hindu widow gets at all a bad name, she suffers greatly at the hands of both her own people and her late husband's. But in spite of all this, her undying love for her dead husband brings her closer to the unknown world every hour and every day. Through suffering and darkness, she knows she is drawing closer to her beloved. My husband made my life like bright sunshine. There were no clouds, no storms, and for the many dear friends I made in the West, I shall ever be grateful to him. His trust, his love, his admiration for me were without compare. When I lost him, I felt that I had lost all. Women of all nations and all countries envied me once. But now I feel that I shall have to travel alone for the last part of my journey."
Suniti spoke of her disappointment with the British at times on certain issues. Like, for example, she was very disappointed when her eldest son Raje and her brother-in-law, the Maharaja of Mayurvanj, did not receive decorations at the Darbar. Raje ruled only for 2 years and passed away rather early at the age of 31 in London. His ashes were brought back to Coochbehar and they lay next to his father at the marble mausoleum. She writes about the viceroys of India, and she says Lord Dufferin is supposed to have been the cleverest viceroy in India. And she talked of Lady Dufferin, whom she liked very much and who herself had written a book in which she mentioned about Suniti's mother, whom Lady Dufferin admired very much. Suniti says that Lady Dufferin founded the Delhi hospital where Indian women were supposed to be trained as doctors and midwives. So when Lady Dufferin asked Suniti whether it would be a success, Suniti said yes, but she thought in her own mind that it would be very difficult for her to make a Western woman understand, things regarding caste and other prejudices. Because she writes, um, to begin with, women of high caste could not do work of the kind as they thought it lowered their position. Secondly, Zanana ladies, however poor, did not wish to be trained or study with men. Therefore, in the beginning, only very common women took up the medical profession. But now, many advanced women have taken it up and have studied hard and taken degrees, thus serving their country, for which we owe much gratitude to Lady Dufferin. Uh, she also talks of some other viceroys also. For example, she talks about Lord Curzon. She says that there was much splendor in the time of the Curzons, but I don't believe that Lord Curzon was ever really in sympathy with us. He is a very clever man, but may I be forgiven for my frankness. I found him slightly interfering in private matters. He was too unapproachable, which was most regrettable. I consider that he missed many golden opportunities. Lord Curzon did a lot of good to the country and tried to revive the old industries, the saris, Kashmirs, etc. Also, he put up tablets on great men's birthplaces and homes, which was much appreciated. But he interfered with the future of the Indian prince's young sons. Whether the fathers were willing or not, he did not wait to find out, but forced them to send their boys into the cadet corps, and by doing, many boys lost their opportunities of learning administrative work. Of course, we had to submit because no one wishes to be in the viceroy's bad books. She had to write this because Rajay and Victor had to join the cadet corps, which Suniti never approved of. Sunitee Devee wrote several books. Apart from the autobiography that she wrote about, she wrote a book on Mughal princesses, the beautiful Mughal princesses. And she also wrote another book titled Bengal Dacoits and Tigers, which was a collection of short stories. Her final book was The Life of Princess Yashodhara, wife and disciple of Lord Buddha. Apart from this, she also did write songs and poems in Bengali. Sunitee Devee was an educationist. Her husband built a school in Coochbehar named after her, and she and her sister Sucharu Devi, who was married to the Maharaja of Mayurbhanj, both of them financed the foundation of a school in Darjeeling, and she was also the first president of All Bengal Women's Union, and she worked for women's rights activists from Bengal with other activists like Charulata Mukherjee, Sarojini Nalini Dutt, T.R. Nelly. And for her school that she had in Coochbehar, she arranged her palace cars to go and fetch the girl students to bring them to school, and she also gave annual grants for the institution that exempted the girl students from paying the tuition fees. Sunitee Devee passed away suddenly at the age of 68 in 1932.